newsflash, not fake news.
Say something about it, Pete. What do you think?
It was great.
All right, good. Moving on.
Are you okay? Devil's in the system, guys.
We need to stop and pray. Good evening and welcome to The Brook on Canaan Radio. It's good to be back in the studio again. Different crew this week. Pastor and Mrs. Reeves are back with us.
We're back.
That's awesome. We don't have a wide view to show everybody the room, but that's okay. We're still going to go around and kind of say hello like we normally do. Brother David, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing all right.
Good.
Pastor, how you doing?
Fantastic.
Good. It's good to have you back. Some structure, some solid foundation.
Y'all did great. I thought it was a super program last week.
It was awesome.
We enjoyed it so much. We were already at the meeting. We were actually in the town of Wichita, and we just pulled over and sat in our truck for the next, how long?
2 hours.
2.5, 3 hours.
Yeah,
Make us proud.
Hey, we might not.
I didn't fall asleep one time.
Oh, well, good.
Probably won't get any hard questions this week now that Pastor's back.
That's true.
I was just proud that there was no WF going on.
No, we did pretty good, right? Yeah. Mrs. Reeves, how are you?
Wonderful.
Good. Jewel, how are you doing down
Very
there?
good.
How's the baby coming?
It's kicking away.
How's it going, chubby?
Yeah.
Take it after my dad.
I got a food baby.
Brother Peter, how are you?
Good.
Been a busy week?
Busy.
Yeah, getting ready for the spring program and trying to finish up a lot of. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Courtney, how are you?
Very good.
Good. Hope.
Hi.
Hi. And Brother JT up in the booth. We love to hear from our listeners during the show. You can text us a song request, 920-940-8275. We've changed the format this year, so there aren't as many spots to play requested songs, but we still want you to request those songs, 920-940-8275. Also, we do the last segment of this season is The Third Degree, which is where you get to ask us really difficult questions. So we'd like to ask everyone at the beginning of the broadcast, please be thinking of questions as you are, Brother Peter, what's going on there? Oh my God. Here's my question. What are you listening to?
All that's supposed to be done beforehand.
Great. JT is faithful. He tries to tell everybody.
He does. He did. Did I say hi to JT?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Hi, JT.
Couldn't remember or not. Anyway. So send us your difficult questions. You can text them to us at 920-940-8275, or you can post them in the chat. I will tell you this. The place that we watch for the most is the chat. We got a question last week in an email, and I didn't see it until after the broadcast.
Yeah, it was from the website.
Who's it from? One for tonight.
It's from Emily.
From M.
From M. We'll have to answer it today. It was a great question.
It was a good
We just didn't see it.
It was a good question. So now we've finished with the formalities, and it's time to talk a little bit about what's going on. Brother Peter, we've been working to get that building done for
Oh, yeah, the
Easter.
auditorium over at 808 West Phillip. It's going to be awesome. We've got it all planned out to have church over there on Easter Sunday. It's going to be awesome. We've been caulking.
Caulk and paint, yeah.
Oh, my fingers are raw.
Painting.
And putty.
And putty.
And wood fill.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing.
When
It looks
it's
great.
done.
You have to come over there to find out. how
Every
it looks.
time we do trim,
Oh, wait, never mind. Just
we learn a lesson, don't we? This last time, we pre-painted all the trim.
so much easier.
It's
All we have
so we
do
don't
some
have to
touch-ups and we're done with it now.
just.
Can you
touch
imagine
up
having to
little
paint
spots.
all of that?
On the floor.
I can't imagine. We
On
can't
top-
imagine.
No, on
Yes,
top
we don't have to imagine. We know
We've done that.
Yeah.
what it would be like to paint it all.
That's true.
Yeah. So,
And not
have any of
just
y'all
touch it up.
had a chance to actually go in there yet?
It looks
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes.
I went in yesterday.
Courtney
when we
walked
got
right
back.
through the glue.
I did. Got
It's
stuck.
okay.
You had to pick me
You
up.
weren't the only one that did it. There was another guy that came through and just started waltzing through. We were in the middle of gluing for carpet.
Court came in and David asked if she was going to help, and she was like, "No." And David's like, "Well, too bad." And so he puts a little bit of caulk on the beam or whatever. Says, "Come over here and rub that." So she finishes a little line. He's like, "All right, good. Now we can say that you helped."
Wow.
I don't think it works that way, but yeah. So that's all I got. That's. I was just going to talk about that. I don't know if anyone's got anything else. How was your guys' trip? You guys are back. How'd things go?
Well, I thought it was good. It's the first week of us traveling and went to 3 different churches.
4.
Our last meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night, and we were supposed to be in Cheyenne, Wyoming,
With Brother Day.
with Brother Day.
But
Instead.
instead,
And for some
We're with
reason,
Brother Day.
my itinerary sent me to Brother Day at Ray
Hope? Well, I don't think
Baptist
so.
Church
In
in
Salina,
Salina,
Kansas.
But it was all right. It all worked out, and we were able to find another church to
and it
go
was
to.
not Hope's
I was
fault.
going to say, please clarify. It was not my fault.
I just was waiting for him to own up and take the responsibility, but
David, take the responsibility.
Family disloyalty. We should just tell.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I
it
wasn't
was
gonna-
my fault.
I wasn't going to throw him under the bus and just,
Yes.
Just under the camper.
this is really no big deal. We, if that's the
The
biggest,
Lord had a plan.
if that's the biggest mistake,
I will tell you this.
all night.
I will
all
tell you this.
night.
I don't think so.
All night.
I
no, I but
listen.
had a plan.
I was listening to a couple of our old broadcasts way back, like season 1, and a couple of those other ones, and I was listening to it, and I promise you, it is not nearly as good as watching it. You have to watch it because there's so many extra things that you get from watching it. Facial expressions that just can't be missed that help communicate.
The brevity of the situation.
Yes.
The gravity.
The
brevity?
gravity.
So
Not
can I
brevity
finish
is-
telling the story about
wrong
that
word.
meeting?
Yes.
That day? You want to tell it?
No, I'm
No,
giving
be
you
all right.
permission to
well,
tell
thank
it.
you, man. I appreciate it. That's
For the next 5
what happens when your wife is older and you go there.
I deserve it.
So I realized so we left the parking lot of the wrong church. I said, let's go get lunch. So we went over to Five Guys and was eating, got done eating, went over to Walmart to get some stuff. And when I came out of Walmart with my wife, I was looking for the key for the camper to put the stuff we bought into the camper. And I couldn't find the keys. And I was freaking out. So I went back into Walmart, retraced all my steps, went to the counter, talked to the ladies, asked them nothing. Went back out to the car, said, well, maybe they're at Five Guys. So we got in the car or the truck and drove over to Five Guys and looked in the parking lot and retraced my steps, went all the way in there and talked to the guy. He goes, you did go out and take a phone call. I said, yeah, I was out there looking already and just was wondering if anybody turned any keys in. No, nobody did. So I was like, oh no, I wonder if I dropped them at the wrong church, Ray Avenue Baptist Church. So we got in the truck, drove all the way over to Ray Avenue Baptist Church, got out and scoured everywhere I went, couldn't find them. So by then we had all that time passed, but I had actually rescheduled a meeting for Wednesday night, but I had to go back about an hour the other direction to Hutchinson, Kansas, and time was fleeting because church was at 7.
Oh, boy.
So I stopped at a locksmith, and the old guy comes out. Man, this old guy he's just trucking. He's fast. I had to run to keep up with him. Got over there and he took those
Lockpick?
Yeah, pick things. He's in there twisting and all that. Bends the thing, and I'm thinking, oh man, nope, can't get it. Hold on. He goes to his truck and books it back, and he's got all these trailer keys. And he's going through. Can you tell I have a trailer? And I'm like, yeah, but he didn't have the key to get in it. And I said, well, can't you just drill it out and put it in? Yeah, you don't want to do that. And he said, go over to there's this other place that sells trailers and campers. Go over there, they'll help you. So I drove like 7 miles, no big deal. But you get over there, and there's just maybe 3 campers for sale on the lot, and the rest of them were just farmer tractors, implement tractors, and stuff like that. Go in there. The guy that helped me was new, and he's asking this guy what to do, and this guy was telling him, hey, check for a key, So he comes out with a handful of keys, and he's trying to, try all these keys. And I said, isn't there just a number that we can get the key number? And he goes, well, you can if you call the place you got it and the manufacturer. And I said, okay, well, while you guys are trying to find the key, I'll call the manufacturer. So by the time I was done calling manufacturer, which was a total waste of time, because the only reason he could give you that number is because whoever constructed the number put it on the paperwork. Oh, man. You would think. What? But no, they didn't put it on the paperwork. So, and Camping World, where I bought it, they couldn't help me because they don't know. So by the time we get done, the guy's through all the keys. And he goes, "Oh, you don't have the key." And I'm like, "Oh man!" So then this other guy comes out and goes, "You guys looking for this?" And it was a green key. And he goes, "You looking for this?" And the guy said, "Yeah, where's that at?" And they're standing there talking. I said, "Guys, I need to. If that's the key, let's get it open." So he goes out there and he opens up the door. So I'm in the camper. I'm like, "Good." And I said, "Can you open up the side panels, because that's got all my stuff for camping in there, and then I've got an extra set at home." So he messes with that. Finally gets it open, gets everything open, and went ahead and bought another lock, a whole lock set. I said, "I'll change that out so that we can at least lock the trailer." Mm-hmm. So basically, I got back. We got a camping spot, got set, changed the lock out. So now the door will lock.
Got ready for church.
Got ready for church. Went all the way over there. And then I was supposed to be presenting to college, and I got up, and there wasn't a person in the room under 60 years of age. So I extended a half-price deal. Tuition's half price to all you that want to come to Bible college. That was probably, that was the biggest problem. We had a little light problem at the beginning of it, and I solved that the first day. And so if you're going to buy a camper, brand new, be ready. It's going to act like it's 100 years old, and you're going to fix a bunch of stuff.
Is that like
But my wife enjoyed. You enjoyed it, right?
I did really enjoy it. It's kind of nice sitting there real close to you all day long.
Really?
Well,
I kept waiting for you to say, "And then I found the keys. They were the center console."
No.
It's like
I lost them somewhere.
Okay,
I think I put them on the bumper when we were leaving Haley's,
Oh.
Richie's, and it probably went off the bumper. But what's nice about the camper, as opposed to hotels, when you go to 3 different churches, that could mean 3 different hotels, and your suitcases, and you're living out of suitcases.
right.
And so we saved money because we lived in the camper on the church property, and you didn't pay for anything.
And I got to cook.
And then, you got everything's there. I mean, I had home cooked meals.
As long as you can unlock the door and get in.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
We do have a hookup for a grill outside. But
Oh, nice.
I don't have a grill, so bring that to the church to see if they'll buy me a grill.
Grill extension thing. Little.
I have
attachment.
so much more to tell you about that trip. I want to start another Bible college course, and this is in lieu of JT graduating this year. What he needs before he goes. I learned a whole bunch of stuff.
We better extend it one more year.
He's got to get his master's anyway.
There you go. Great master.
I think that pastors, not all of them get to be full time, and so pretty much 2 of the 3 were one's bivocational, the other one's paid by the church, but he also drives a bus, and then the other one is paid by the church, but he also is the sheriff's chaplain for the sheriff department in the county, and so they have all pastors have multiple sources of income. But this is the one thing that I have seen is the Achilles heel to a pastor that's bivocational and he works in the pastors of church, is very few men will step up to take care of their properties first class. If it's like I was thinking about JT. So here's JT's working a full-time job. He's freshly married. That thing. You don't. What's that? You don't.
Go to war?
You don't go to war for 2 years or something like that?
Just 1.
Is it 1 year? Okay. So, everybody that's just freshly married, they know that verse because that's why they're not doing as much in the church as they used to do when they were single, because
June 3rd 's
I have taken the wife, and I
November
cannot
4th
come.
is coming.
And I was just thinking, when you're working a full-time job, what are you going to do? You go start a church, JT, in Kearney, that's great. But if you think that I'm going to pay for everything just because you're starting it out of our church, and you're not going to go out and work extra and you're taking care of your properties, our maintenance team's not going there to take care of your building. And that's the reality of guys that go out in the ministry. They don't realize if my church building is falling apart and nasty and dirty, that slows down anybody. I wouldn't want to go to a nasty church like that, building like that. So you have to learn to take care of your properties, but it's going to take long days and long nights. Very, very little fishing, very little hunting, if any, very little date nights. Your wife better learn how to do everything with you and be happy that you, like my wife said, just get to sit next to you. That would be great. You have to give Emma a place on the platform so she could sit next to you.
That's great.
Yeah, the piano. There you go.
So I got a lot of ideas, for the college, new classes and stuff.
It's good.
And we got a bunch of cards of people interested. There's another
That's awesome.
independent Baptist college that's actually closing in Kansas, and so so a lot of interested people. So that's just 1 week. I can't imagine the stories I'm going to have.
Start a vlog.
Oh, while you were gone, we had a lot of stories too. We're just not telling them.
Well, I had asked you guys if anything exciting happened.
It was great. It was good.
Exciting isn't the word. So.
What happened?
No, nothing. All good things.
The Lord has the glory.
Pete, family loyalty, staff loyalty.
Yes, definitely.
I'm kidding. Oh man.
All right.
Well, let's move on, because we historically so far it's been a long broadcast on this family. I've been enjoying this season in the Growing Up IFB, and today is going to be especially fun as we talk about family disloyalty. And we're going to go ahead and go to a song, and when we come back, jump right into things. Fight On, the Stephen Ray Nichols family, and we'll be right back.
Fight on.
Fight on. Got to start it off right.
Well, we're back, and we're going to be talking about family disloyalty. Don't let the title fool you. We're actually talking about family loyalty. But the subject has been brought up because so often we see families falling apart, and there is no family loyalty. That's one thing that we have tried to establish in our home, and now it is our privilege to try to make sure that a new perspective of family loyalty is taught and carried out now that we have married children. And so it's just as important. From the beginning of time, we've seen families splintered apart for various different reasons. Cain killed Abel. Then you have Joseph and his brothers. You have Esau and Jacob. You have Samson turning against his own parents' advice on who to marry. Just tons of examples in the Bible. God continually asked the children of Israel to confess the sins of their fathers before going forward and having any kind of blessing. The reason a country falls is because its people fall. The reason churches fall is that strong families are not being built. There's a huge need to teach the principles of God's Word in the area of biblically balanced family loyalty. We must build a family that loves Jesus together and will keep His ways for generations to come. We often get hurt in church by other Christians, but fail to heal from that hurt because we are not taught how in the home. So much family disloyalty exists, and it has ended up killing many who have grown up in the IFB. I think about many times where I've sat down with my boys, and we've had conversations about the independent fundamental Baptist preachers and their sons and even their daughters and the families, and how they get to a certain point where the next generation begins to take over in that movement or in that church. And it's funny how they eat their parents alive, or they criticize, they make statements, or drop standards, or and of course they're always justifying it because their parents made them do things when they were growing up. So I thought it would be good to surround the table with all kids that have grown up in the IFB movement and kind of get perspective from their side. We were talking about many different subjects, but I thought this is a good subject because of the recovering fundies and all the people that are going away and blaming the independent fundamental Baptist movement, which is and was led by the parents. And so obviously there's a lot of dissatisfaction and bitterness in our movement. And I thought, I can't teach it because I didn't grow up IFB. I got started late in life. But everybody here at this table, including my wife, all grew up in the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement and have their own perspective of how they've seen things and how things have been dealt with. But I think it's very important to understand that if you're going to build a future where you have generation after generation serve the Lord, you have to be careful that you don't blame God for everything. And when these people leave the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement, really the end of the conversation and the blame falls on they don't trust God. They didn't trust God when they were growing up, and so they take it out on the movement. But so with that, I will open it up to whoever would like to jump in first. Set, go.
Well, I don't mind piggybacking off of what
Sure.
Of what you said, because I know as a parent we really did try to foster a team spirit in our family of we're all on the same team, we're pulling for each other. But I know even looking back at my growing up, and then you see what their coming fundies have to say about their parents and all the disrespect and dishonoring that does go on, and that's clearly not godly. But then on the other hand, you have the verses about confessing the sins of your fathers, and then on the other hand, love covered a multitude of sins, and
Or
finding
honor your father and mother.
right, finding the right balance of being able to see things that are wrong, have discussions at appropriate times, appropriate places, and then being able to go on and still do all that with a respectful and honoring spirit. And it's even now that our kids are grown, they are still in that state because now they're married, and now they still have that. You continue to learn that struggle of, if I need help with something in my marriage and I'm going to go talk to my dad or my pastor or my mom, but I'm not dumping on my spouse. And I know early in our married life, I faced that. There was one time I was thinking about going and talking to somebody at the college we were at because I was wanting some marriage counseling. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, what are they going to tell me? And I'm not saying people shouldn't go get counsel, but I do think there's a lot of times counsel is not what we want. What we want is emotional support. Right. What we want is someone to be like, oh,
Yeah, I would say that you were very mature in your outlook of that. A lot of people get married young and don't have quite that balanced way of looking at things. And the truth is, the only reason you would seek counsel is because there was an issue in our marriage that didn't seem to be working out. And I'm a very strong man. So I'm sure that weighed into, should I go? Will he be mad at me? And I know
I never felt like you would be mad at me.
Right.
The more I thought about it, the more I knew that the answers were in God's word. Mm-hmm. And I just recounted, if somebody came and asked me this question, what would I tell them? And I had Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse. Nobody needed to tell me what God said. I knew. So therefore, did I need to go get that counsel, or was I just seeking? And I just had to evaluate for myself. And for myself, I'm like, I really didn't need an answer.
Yeah.
It was just trust in the Lord and wait patiently. Continue to do what's right. All the things that you know to do.
In all fairness, just to bring things out, I've said this to everyone on the program, especially my kids. So you may have to expose maybe some issues which would make you feel like, oh no, I'm being disloyal. But actually, in order for us to teach this thing of family loyalty or to share with you, we have to all be willing to somewhat expose ourselves. And in that story, I want to be honest, I know what it was about. My wife grew up in Ohio and was a Cleveland Brown fan. I was a Green Bay Packers fan. And she was really struggling because I expected her to become a Green
Right,
Bay
Courtney?
Packers fan. And she was torn. She was torn. And, but she has come to my side. And,
How long did
like
it take?
a good wife.
Seeing some marriage counseling going on here.
That didn't happen.
Preach in the middle and
She never did that. She's always right immediately on my side.
Yeah.
Whatever I liked.
Good wife right there.
Who's next? Yeah.
It's good. I guess I'll take the baton and run. I don't know where I'm running to, but no. I think it's interesting because the verse comes to my mind. A friend liveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. I think sometimes we look at that verse and we think that a brother is born to give adversity.
Yeah.
That's often how it is sometimes thought of. Although that may be true, I don't think that's the proper context. It's more speaking that a brother is born for the times of adversity. You know, a good friend is always going to be there. But even more so, God gives family, blood relatives that are supposed to stick with you through the thick and through the thin. And I think that can lend itself to easily treating your family with more disloyalty than loyalty because you know they're there. I know it was a couple weeks ago. I think me and Courtney had this conversation about if you know us Reeves at all, you know that we're very passionate people. No. And that passion extends across all areas of life that we're involved in, and but it's equaled by our
Everything's
loyalty.
a full contact sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to see us golfing?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's equaled by our loyalty to one another. So we're very close. We grew up, and you know, I think partially because we grew up always in smaller areas, smaller cities or smaller churches, and that allowed us to grow closer together. But that also festers, I think, festers may be the right word for that, a treatment of one another, where in discourse we may not have as much charity with one another because of the fact that we know at the end of the day, like, I honestly don't care how I treat my brother because he's still my brother, and you know
He'll forgive you.
he'll forgive me.
He'll
you know,
be
we'll be
there.
fine.
He
I'll be
has no
sending
place
the
to
memes
go.
5 minutes later.
Yeah, and so I think there's that side of it that I think you have to be careful of. That as Christians, we don't, as a family of Christians, that we learn to treat each other correctly through that loyalty. I think that's an important aspect. I was going somewhere with that, and I can't remember where I was going.
I will say this while
It's just a
you're
long train. I forgot where the end was.
trying to find your place. Being hurt by each other is practice ground for surviving in the world. You have to learn to forgive, and a lot of times what happens in the church world, we don't forgive people because we're not forgiving to each other. We just develop our own little worlds and pull back into our own little worlds, and we don't really work things out. But you guys have been made, put the gloves on, get in the boxing ring. If you don't agree with each other, get over it real quick. I'm going to make you kiss.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was about to say that.
Things like that.
Yeah, I think I remember where I was going with that. I was saying, I think partially because of that loyalty that we have to one another, we can disagree with one another or maybe pick each other apart for our failures or, issues that we have in life. But it's interesting because the area of that family loyalty that we grew up with, that we were taught, and partially just because I think it's natural because of how close we were, is that when somebody else outside of the little nest of family,
picks them. Yeah.
Maybe pinpoints that same error that's in us or fault that's in us, we don't jump with them and be like, yeah, it's almost like that error doesn't exist and we have to defend. Yeah. And I think what that can do is on the outside looking in, I think sometimes people that maybe that I don't want to say haters, but maybe they're maybe a little bit judgmental towards us. Like, how can you work on staff with your dad? Because all they ever see is our agreement. because they may attack you. They may bring out something that maybe is an error or something.
And say that you don't have.
And say that we don't have our own minds, that we can't.
Right.
But the truth is, all that is family loyalty. You know, you can get on a bandwagon, or you can find something that may be true that's wrong with my authority, that's wrong with my parents, that's wrong with my pastor. And I may agree. And in personal relationship, a personal conversation, we may talk about those things, and we do, and we have, you know, WWE.
That's
and
why
those
we're
type of
still
things.
together.
Exactly. But on the outside looking in, you know, I'm not going to be like, yeah, you're right, because that's leadership, and that's what honor means. You know, that's what love is. That's what charity. I was thinking about this portion of scripture in 1 Corinthians 13 that talks about charity. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. And I think that's really what it is. It's rejoicing. It's your perspective. What do you choose to rejoice in? Right. I choose to rejoice in those things that are right with my authority, that are right with my parents, and focus on those things on the outward for everybody to see, because it's loyalty. You know, the definition of loyalty is a strong feeling or support of allegiance. That's what I have to my family.
And what's the biblical term for loyalty?
Faithfulness.
Yes.
Faithful.
Because we know loyalty is actually a term coined by the Romans, and it was used to keep the subjects of the soldiers in line, to be royal to the throne, and you know, upon penalty of death. So a lot of times there is a bad teaching of loyalty within the church and church world that could be solved if you taught faithfulness in the home. I am going to be faithful to my wife, even if she does burn the biscuits 600 times. You know, I'm going to be faithful to my children. You know, nobody knows my children's faults and failures better than I do, and nobody knows my failures and faults better than my children do. So to build a core of people and keeping our family together says a lot about our Christianity, not just about us as a family, but our personal Christianity, because I can't make you forgive me. You have to choose to. And the Bible says, my son, give me thine heart. I can't just take my kid's heart. You know, that's one thing that I've always been concerned about. As my children get married, they are going to marry people that did not grow up with me, and it's going to take a while for them to understand me, and you know, I can't make them love me. So it just takes time. But with my family, I have taught them to forgive. They last week told stories about how I was treated in fundamentalism. And I remember them, I don't understand, Dad, you can put up with that stuff. But in each one of their lives, I've seen them be just as gracious and forgiving to other people in their own lives. So the Christianity has to be real in the home, and forgiveness has to be taught amongst the children and amongst the parents. And
forgiveness includes the conversations and the talking about it and the communication, because true forgiveness doesn't happen when everybody just shuts up and ignores.
Yeah. We didn't allow you to hold a grudge. If we saw you being vengeful, hateful, you know, trying to get somebody back, you know, you're just holding a grudge leads to bitterness. And it defiles many. So if we saw you even acting like you were holding a grudge to your brother or sister, we dealt with that. And we had to work on that with each other, because
we were the example.
We couldn't be married 33 years, and we struggled. There were times we struggled, but principles were set in our life that we deferred to, even we didn't feel like deferring to them. And that's what saved our marriage and helped us to have the family we do. So,
and really, that's the key to ministry, is because you have to work with people. I mean, being able to communicate with them, forgive, and keep a sense of loyalty or team spirit, in spite of knowing what their failures are.
I just couldn't imagine what these other pastors who had family that are in the ministry, their kids grew up in the ministry with them, they led, and the kids turn 18, and it's just like they just don't go into another ministry. They just go into the world. And I can't even fathom the weight of the parents and the brokenheartedness of the parents. Most people that produce children like that actually have a mechanism in them to ignore it. And so they're very prideful, and they don't want to talk. They won't acknowledge that they missed a lot of things that would produce that kind of environment or that kind of child or decision making. The kids are responsible for their own actions, but they are made up of all of our good and all of our bad. So we, as parents, take responsibility. But that's just a weight. And I can't imagine as a kid having something as good as a family united going the same direction and then having that just fall apart, or trading it off, or losing your mom and dad's ear and friendship and camaraderie. And
Well, and some of that is probably because they didn't have that built. That family loyalty wasn't built from, a young age. I think going back to what David was saying, am I not loud enough?
yeah, I was speaking in the mic.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Because I can hear myself fine. So, going back to what David was saying about how essentially what you're saying is, I can pick on you,
But nobody else can.
but nobody else can pick on you. And that's actually true to a certain extent, like when you're thinking as a little kid. But then there is the appropriateness. I think you referenced that. And sometimes when family struggles happen, as they're going to, and inter-family turmoil happens, everybody is really big on, I just need to vent. I need to find that person I can vent to.
Right.
And then it's like 5 people that you have to vent to. And then the entire church knows everything that's going on in your home.
And then the entire world because of social media.
Right. And then the entire world because of social media. So I think learning at a young age that family loyalty isn't keeping a secret. It's being appropriate. It's saying, hurts, disappointments, failures are going to happen all the way around this table. It's going to happen, whether directly to you or just as, damaging the family as a whole. But to be so troubled by that you feel like you have to go outside the family first. And we're not talking going to a pastor, just, I got to tell my friend so I can get counsel. Well, how many friends do you have that have been your friends for longer than 5 years?
Sure.
I mean, come on. It's not that. It's exactly what you said. It's, I need to feel validated. I need to feel like I need somebody to say, yes, what I am feeling matters. And that starts as young as 3, 4, 5, and 6 when they don't get their way with mom and dad. And then they think they can go somewhere else and get.
I think that's why it's important that what we did to have you read Proverbs every day, because Proverbs is a book of wisdom, and really that's what our children need to be taught. When do I say something? When don't I?
Mm-hmm.
When is it what? Wisdom teaches you when that is acceptable and it isn't. And family loyalty doesn't work without wisdom. You
Right.
can't be loyal in your family just by jumping through the hoops that I demand you jump through. You actually have a higher responsibility of biblical principle.
Right. And I think, too, pointing out that in order to have a healthy family loyalty, there also has to be the leadership available for you to go to. I mean, if I have an issue with Will, as a kid, I needed to feel like I could go to Dad and get my head straight. And then he'd say, okay, now go to Will. Work out your issues with your brother. Because yes, there's a certain extent of you need counsel. You need to go, especially when you're learning and you're growing and you're trying to work through these issues. So in my head, the family loyalty and having that ability to go talk to somebody within the family,
Right.
your not your pastor, your father figure, I would assume would be the best, or in cases when it involves women, maybe your mom. And I do think on occasion, your brothers and sisters, and you should be able to, what does the Bible say? Iron sharpeneth iron. You should be able to just not sit there and go, yeah, it's me and Courtney against David. Always, right? No. Like this afternoon. David was sticking his tummy out on his shirt. He likes to walk around and be an idiot sometimes. But
It's just sticking out
It's just-
naturally. I don't know what you're
I was
talking
gonna
about.
I was going to say.
So Courtney turns around and looks at him. Sorry, I'm being disloyal right now. Just looks at him and goes, well, suck your tummy and it's gross or something like that. And I was standing over there. I was dying. I'm like, oh, that bugs you too. That's funny. And I said, it's amazing. Anybody married David. And so in that moment, I was not really sharpening her. I was just jumping on her bandwagon. No, but, being able to, if somebody seriously has a problem with somebody else in the family, just to be, here we go, have the safe space to talk about it with your family and not constantly go outside the family.
Yeah, how'd that go for you, though? Every time, it was that way, but one of the struggles you all had was, it seems like every time we go to our leadership, it ends up being a problem with us. It's like you didn't automatically get a leadership agreeing with you that Will was bad or that someone was wrong. Often it reflected back on what is your responsibility in the Bible when someone treats you wrong. Oh, go with them another mile. Oh, turn the other cheek.
Exactly.
Oh, and those are the principles that were lobbed back at you. So you guys had to struggle with, why do I even go to them anyway?
I think if you love the Lord, that's less of a struggle.
Yeah.
I think if you sincerely want to do what is right because you have a good relationship with the Lord, this goes back to what we talked about last week, then you're not going to get tripped up over that. Not that you'll never be frustrated, but also I think your leadership can see when you're there.
Mm-hmm.
I think to piggyback off of what you're saying there, it's interesting because I think those who leave the IFB and don't just leave, but turn around and attack what they grew up, what they were given, I think they're broadcasting two things. And one is that they've not had a proper family relationship. Because I think there's a little bit of that truth when it comes to when you're dealing with things, God gave you that family to be able to go to. And it may not always be your leaders, but they should be spiritual enough to, as Galatians says, bear you one another's burdens,
exactly.
to where you can vent a little bit. And you don't have to get on Twitter.
No.
And broadcast your bitterness to all mankind. And so really what they're saying is, I don't have family that I can do that to. I've got to take a social media platform and vent.
Create an RFP fam.
And that's Psalm 68.
Create a fake family.
Psalm 68 says God set up the solitary in
families.
Right.
families, not fake families like you said, the RFP fam. Not these little cell groups of people that let's all complain about something.
We're all
together.
bitter, so that makes us a family.
Yeah, we've all been abused.
Gossips.
A real family. God set people in a family for a reason, and you have a responsibility to. You are your brother's keeper.
Right.
Yes, you are.
Right.
And that's in more than just a physical way, emotionally and spiritually. I've always told you guys, don't be afraid to tell on your brothers and sisters. Snitching is not wrong. It's needed. You help, and that brings me to this other thought. I think not every family has hypersensitive parents, like us, who sees just about all. At least it feels that way when you're growing up. Sometimes you have parents that really don't see much of anything, and you end up leading an isolated life. Doesn't mean that you can't turn out for God. It just means you have to come to that place by a different route, and that's establishing your walk with God way earlier than most kids have to.
And he will give you what you need if you go towards the Lord.
Yeah, I think Pete probably, I don't know what your parents were like. You probably speak to this. I don't even you, Courtney. Your parents may not have been as hypersensitive on things as me and Mrs. Rees are, but you will find that you also probably made some decisions very early in your life to walk with the Lord and please Him. That's just a guess. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. What do you think, Pete?
Well, yes and no. So
fair enough.
There's a lot of aspects to growing up that honestly, there was no opportunity for family disloyalty in a lot of cases when I grew up. So it's not like I had a bunch of friends
They
at
practice.
church
What do
that
you
could
call
speak
that?
English that
Killing
I could
yourself,
confide in.
Harry Carey.
Harry Carey. Seppuku.
Yeah.
It's the much easier pronunciation for you.
I don't know. It's a Japanese.
Tomika.
She would know that. Is it Harry
Konnichiwa.
Carey?
I heard her Japanese
so
is
great.
really good also.
Just fall on the sword.
Indeed. No, honestly, the perspective I come from on this is it's more of looking back on what did happen and not how it happened. How do I explain that? There's a lot of stuff that didn't really come to mind growing up that I could look back on from this vantage point, knowing what I know now, and say, you know what, that shouldn't have happened that way,
Yeah, right.
but it did. And the perspective of that is, you know what? That's probably the case in a lot of kids' lives. Is like, oh, that shouldn't have happened that way, but it did.
Right.
But how do you handle it from that point?
Yeah.
And having the understanding that, first off, number one, your parents, you have to ask, okay, if they're Christians, then, were they out to hurt you? Then, okay, you should 99.9999% of that time be obviously the answer is absolutely not. They're not out to hurt you. They're not out to get you. They're not out to punish you in any way. But from there, you have to be able to digest what happened, why it happened, where it happened, to whom it happened, and all that kind of stuff. And then from there, go back to, did I learn what I was supposed to learn?
Yeah.
So I can't really put a finger on any particular instance other than where family loyalty, like the people at church when I was growing up were all old. All of them were. We rarely had kids in church.
Yeah.
We had some kids in Sunday school, but again, we weren't allowed to really interact with the kids in church. I mean, we really didn't have a lot of opportunities. They spoke Japanese way better than and didn't speak English. We had a bare understanding of Japanese and spoke English. So it really wasn't an opportunity for us to, oh, my parents did this. And also, we grew up on the mission field. We knew we were missionaries. We knew that we were way different from the people we were trying to reach.
It was
so
expected.
it was like, yeah, we're gaijins. We're way different. Duh. Things are going to be different.
And that aspect probably helped you.
Yeah. So looking back on some things that happened, or then I could say that, okay, that was kind of weird. But again, few and far between, but there are instances where I can say that, my parents, did they think that through?
Yeah.
Probably not, but you know what? It's not like they meant harm.
But you don't fault them.
No, it's not like they meant harm. There were a lot of things that they knew, that we knew that they wished that they could help us or give us or have us more opportunities with. But and I knew from looking back and how they acted that they felt bad about that in many, many ways. And not really anything they could do to remedy it either. But it's just how the situation was and where we were and what we were allowed and able to do and what they were able to give us.
That's good.
But
Well, and I like what you said earlier when we were talking about this subject, and you said we all keep growing, and that when you take that into account, when you begin, as you get older and you begin to see your parents as people and not just as your parents, and you realize that they are continuing to grow as people and as Christians, and that same grace that was afforded to you as you were growing up, then hopefully you can dish that back.
Yeah.
And to your siblings and to your family and then to your church family and then out in the work world, that you can get along with people because you realize they're not all at the same place at the same time, but especially if you know that someone's growing. So knowing, and this is why it is so vitally important that you marry the right spouse, because all this stuff we're talking about doesn't work. I mean, you can work it for yourself. You can always, the Lord works for you individually, whether or not anyone around you, but it's so much more difficult. If your spouse isn't serving the Lord like you are, then all of this stuff just becomes so much
It's
more
not so much
difficult.
like as it is heart surrendered.
Right.
They're not. If my wife wasn't surrendered to the ministry or to the service of the Lord, surrendered to please God first, and she looked at it differently. Well, I'm just obviously you're supposed to complete me, but you need to live for I want you to live for the Lord, and you'll fill that role. So to me, it's more than just a doing. It's an understanding in your heart. You were made by God to please Him. And are you pleasing Him by, always being a thorn in the flesh to your husband? Are you, so. What about you, Courtney?
I think talking with David about this topic and looking back, one of the reasons I'm very thankful for my parents being proactive in building family loyalty was at the points in my life where I was at a crossroads of going this way or, continuing to do right. Mm-hmm. There was a big part of me that, I wasn't spiritually where I needed to be, but knowing the heartbreak I'd bring to my parents, to my family name, was a big reason of staying right.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the essence of my son gave me that heart. Somewhere when you were a kid, you just fell in love with your mom and dad. We never want to hurt them in any way. I think sometimes kids grow up in a very different world, selfish world, and they don't really attach themselves to their parents, almost resent them. And so, I think there's that element that I wish every kid had. It's like I've heard people on Twitter literally expose their parents' weaknesses when they were growing up and crucify them, knowing that their daughter, the people's grandparents, they put a division there and just air out all the dirty laundry in sheer bitterness to their parents, not even considering the fact that they're destroying that relationship as well.
And I think what's unique about Courtney's family is so much of her family has been involved in her church. And it really goes to show why it is important for family members as a unit to cooperate serving the Lord together. Because her family was not the only people that were in church. Mm-hmm. I mean, her direct family. She also had uncles and aunts and grandparents on both sides of the family, and cousins.
So you had a huge heritage to uphold.
Right, and those are all strings, or all support pillars in keeping children or your family right, or you as an individual right, because not only do you have your brothers and sisters that you would disappoint, or your mom and dad, but you also have generations of those who have laid the groundwork of Christianity before you. You have, not to bring anything personal, but I was watching a video a couple years ago that was on her phone from her when her grandmother passed away, and her whole family standing around singing Amazing Grace. And I'm watching that, and I was thinking to myself, I think how powerful is that when you have uncles and aunts and nephews and cousins around, the beginning, what started the whole family in the first place, and they're all still in church, they're all singing Amazing Grace, they're all supporting together the Lord. How strong is that in the family pool of making sure that you don't just throw in the towel? And look at those spiritual clunkers that give up and are running headlong into the wind or into the world. And I guarantee you, look at their families, and they won't have that foundation. They won't have that spiritual strength of all of that pool. And I think that's important. I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, your dad did not have that coming in, but then you build it. You have the opportunity. You marry right, and you begin to build that, and you be that grandparent, that great-grandparent. Mm-hmm. You're building your future.
Faithfulness. Mm-hmm. Being faithful.
Man.
And it comes back to, the whole purpose of being a Christian, as a Christian family, being involved in a church, is to uplift Christ. Right. And if you have family disloyalty, what that does is, here it is in John chapter 13 and verse 34, it starts a new commandment. This is Jesus talking. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. In verse 35, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples.
That's good.
He's talking about his name. Christ is talking about his name. If ye have love one to another. So, yes, but love isn't just overlooking anybody's faults and saying, they're a great person. That isn't love. Love is what Jesus said, as I have loved you. How does Jesus love us? He points out every little thing. And by the way, it's not like Jesus puts up on a billboard every time you sin above your head, like the flames of fire in the upper room. It's like, hey, liar, you know.
Big arrow.
Yeah. Boing. Idiot. Oh, well, we could all wear that hat, I'm sure.
Not me.
But that isn't what Jesus does. He doesn't expose every single one of our sins. Now, when we get to heaven, that'll happen. And those things will be made known. The secrets will be shouted on the housetop. But that isn't what a family is supposed to do. It's supposed to love. Mm-hmm. And that is to say, hey, if you love your brother, you're going to help them do right.
Yeah.
So if your parents are the problem in your mind, you're going to want to help them do right if you love Christ. If you want to be his disciple, if you want to uplift his name, it's going to be to make sure your family is all pulling together toward making Jesus look good. And you can't do that if you're just bickering and being bitter about stuff. Because if that's all the world sees, then they're going to say, oh, you're a Christian. Yeah, you're not his disciple. You hate Jesus.
I think on a practical level, things that we tried to teach our kids. I know you had some things, Jill. I don't know if you have your list out or not, but some practical things, like teaching our children that there are permissible subject matters that can be talked about in a public arena, church environment, with friends, and there are certain things that should not be. Some of that starts at an early age, not letting your children get involved with adult conversations. Never allowed that. If a child came in and interrupted when I was talking to another adult, I stopped and looked at them and said, this is an adult conversation. And they knew, and they put it into it. But there was that. But then, I've looked around fundamentalism, and we've all seen it. Kids coming out and saying, oh, my dad does it all the time. Destructive.
Right.
It's just destructive. And to talk negative about your parents, they may not be in the scope of measuring by the Bible the greatest parents in the whole world, but they still have you in church, and you're still, in Christian school, or, they're feeding you, they're clothing you. You have to start with an understanding that someone has it worse than you, and so whatever you have is good. And that God did not give you your parents to torture you. You were not born predestined to be put through a rough life, because God's a sadistic God. So finding the good in your life and the good in your parents is important, but teaching that, you have to have practical things in your child rearing that will help them. And one of the things we told our kids is, we'll talk about, when we go visit churches, we'll talk about the issues when we get in the vehicle. But we're not going to talk about it in church, That's
not going to have an attitude.
Yeah, and then even when we were in the car together, there was a limit to how far we could take our comments. So the man of God's still the man of God. Just because he doesn't do it like your dad does it, doesn't mean that you get to personally attack him or run him down. So, and we also taught them to abide by the leadership when it wasn't in agreement with the parents. And so, all of that's communicating family loyalty and proper loyalty, and how to operate and balance those things out. When you get a kid that has had that, they can very easily go into the world and get a job in a terrible company with terrible bosses and still be successful, because their success is not determined by the leadership that's around them. It's not determined by the co-laborers around them. It's determined by their walk with God. And I don't care what anybody says, people like the product that we have built. They just hate the way we have gone about it. But it works. It works. And so, did you open up your list? You're not going to talk about those things?
I'll have to. I didn't look at it yet. I was just listening to what you were saying, and it just reminded me that with kids, when they're young, you really have to begin to instill this when they're young, and it's, it does take control. Does they have to learn to take their cues from their parents, what's appropriate and what's not. But then, like you said, your goal is that they give you their heart, and that, it begins to transition from you looking at them like they're going to be in trouble if they do something to them wanting to do what's right, to please their parents, and ultimately to please the Lord. And then, Brother Tyson put a comment in here about how it's very difficult when somebody does have family disloyalty, and that's a whole nother subject, whether it's, in your family, if your children are going away from the Lord, one of them goes away from the Lord, or, that's a whole nother ball of wax of how you handle all of that stuff, and handling it amongst each other when you feel like someone's kind of, I think that was one of the things on my list, was when somebody does step on your toes, or somebody, even as we're older now, our kids are older, and whether they're telling a story, giving an illustration, or whether they're just joking around, and you think it's something that wouldn't bother the other person,
Right.
and then how you handle that as, as a sibling, or even as a parent, when you feel like they're telling a story on you
Yeah.
that doesn't put you in the best light, and
I think we're blessed, Jill, you and I are blessed at this point to not have that problem of our children, our personal children, going away from the Lord and then actually reaping havoc with our rest of our kids or the rest of our family. But I do think we have extended family that has gone away from the Lord. And I will just tell my 4 kids and anybody that's listening, just because one child goes away from the Lord doesn't negate all the Bible truths and responsibilities that you have been tasked with by God and the Word of God. Yeah. And so family, no matter how hard, let's say David goes astray and he tries pulling, sowing discord with the other ones, those other ones need to know, just because he walked away doesn't mean that you have a loyalty to listen to him on those subject matters. You have actually a greater responsibility, not to your parents, but to Christ, to sound the trumpet louder, which will keep intact your family loyalty you had when everybody was in the group. I just won't allow one child to cause everybody else to be questioning what they've been taught their whole life. And so that has to be taught pre-adulthood, that they have that walk with God that they're responsible for. So
I did want to pipe in. I remember when I was in college, when I moved so far away. I'm just kidding. It was really a different time because we had girls come in, and I never had that opportunity just to sit down and randomly talk and have that time. It was normally just our family. And I think being careful, because our family, our beliefs are different. And I just said something out of the blue in front of a group of girls. And honestly, I didn't think anything of it because I had been taught that, and it's just what came out. And turned out down the line that not everybody in the group believed that same thing, and it caused a problem. And of course, you had to handle it. And then it was, for me, a situation where I had to sit down and go, that's probably something that didn't need to come out. I should have kept my mouth shut on that one.
But really, honestly, you weren't disloyal.
No.
There's a big difference. You were just repeating what you were taught with confidence of what you believe.
Maybe
not because of what I believe, but because of what you said. Of course, everybody knows whatever comes out of your mouth is from pastor, So they figure with people's personalities who are not tending to speak up much, that if they do speak up, if they have a strong parent, strong influence, they feel like they just do it out of obligation. Mm-hmm. And I never felt like you threw me under the bus. I had a natural problem because this is the repercussion from standing for right and truth. Now, not everybody's going to explain it. Like, I'm 55. I'll explain that issue a lot better than a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid will. And that's, I think that's the key. How would you have felt if I would have blamed you?
Right.
You'd have been crushed. And so then where do you go with that?
I think what I'm getting at is just being careful with your words when you're around people.
Being wise.
Because anything,
Yeah.
whether if it's something that could damage someone else
Right.
and maybe you're really strong on it, I'm not saying that it would hurt the other person if they didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like being mindful of what could be a stumbling block to
Right.
others, even though, because some things in a family may be more focused on and can be talked about more, strongly.
Yeah.
Whereas, maybe expressing that to other people that aren't there spiritually in their walk yet, may not understand that yet, they can trip up on that a little early.
Yeah,
so
I-
just thinking about other people that you
I agree with that, but then if you take it to a common denominator type of illustration, I mean, if you're a roomie with somebody in college and they don't know how to shower or use soap, you don't want to just say, "Hey, you stink," but
Right.
but you might say, we were always taught to take a shower every day and use our soap. That's what mom and dad taught me. That's pretty much how you took your stand in college when you just said that. It just naturally came out of you because you were taught that. And the repercussions of that person can go, if their heart is wanting to learn, they can take it. If their heart is prideful and arrogant and self-centered and selfish, they're going to get mad at you and then blame you for something that you didn't mean to. It would be a lot easier to say, "Hey, buddy, you stink. Use some soap." Not buddy because you're
Yeah.
a girl, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, I think to bring things down on maybe a little bit more practical level.
Yeah, bring us down.
This is something not right or wrong
Right.
necessarily. Okay, for instance, we went on a great family vacation to Disney World, Disneyland, Disney something. I don't even remember. That's how long ago it was. And the Lord just showed, this is when we went to Arizona, and he just showed himself real. We didn't pay for that. At a church we were at, got together and surprised us. It was just something nice and fun. But I remember it was during times like that where we got to go do these really fun things that at the end of them, when we went to go home, Dad would say, now it wasn't a big deal. He didn't sit us all down, but he would say, "Hey, this was a family thing that we did. You don't need to feel this need to go tell all your friends every little thing that you did." Why? Because it was a secret? Because you did something wrong? No, but because it could potentially be a stumbling block. We had a small church at the time with other family who didn't get to go on a
Right.
vacation. And at that time we were traveling. It wasn't supposed to be a vacation. We were traveling different churches and we were ministering, and a church did something special for us. They gave us a blessing. And you said, it wasn't a big secret. I'm pretty sure it's like, when you eat the cheeseburgers and said, "Don't tell mom," and then you walked in the door and you were the first one to tell. It was the same type of situation. But it just helped us to learn that there are just some things that can be, even as a good thing. It's not that it was a bad thing, but
You
that
don't need to
could
talk about it.
But you don't need to, because it's not appropriate all the time. You need to be aware that other people are at a different stage of life. And I think essentially that fosters you being able to look at your family members, being able to look at other people outside,
Yeah.
and give some people a break and go, you know what? They might not understand. I think that's what Joel is saying. It's like they might not have understood what I thought they understood at the time, but I didn't take a moment to pause and say, is this the appropriate time or place to be having this discussion? Probably not. And had she taken 5 seconds to think about it, in hindsight, she's like, yeah, I probably could have avoided this whole thing if I just not said anything.
Right.
And it's just the same, just for those little fun things that we got to do. It was a family time. You would say, this is family time. Family time stays in the family.
Right.
So,
And I think that applies to when you get older. And I said this in my office earlier. It's interesting trying to hold you guys to a standard of building your own family loyalty. So here's Will, my first son, getting married. I want to keep the door open that I can be a source of counsel and wisdom, but I also can't go in and tell him how to do. And he has to go home. He has to be careful, because if he comes home and he talks negative about his boss, which is pastor, his dad, then that's going to affect his wife and his daughter. So encouraging all three of you men to be aware of your family and your wives and their needs, and to have discussions that won't sour the pot against your leadership. understanding, hey, look, there's been many times, and I'm sure there'll be many times in the future where you'll feel I took a little liberty in the pulpit because you're my son-in-law or you're my boys, and you'll go, oh. If you don't learn to forgive and compare what I did to sometimes the liberty you take with your wife or with your kids, or has to be a balance. Mm-hmm. And the only way to deal with when you're wronged or you feel when you're wronged is when you can't seem to justify it or work it out in your mind. You have to sit down with the person you're offended with.
Right.
And you have to have not an ultimatum, not a coming to Jesus moment, but just a heart-to-heart, knowing that, just like you said, Peter, my parents weren't there to hurt me. They weren't doing these things purposefully to hurt me. And keeping that in mind, you can fix those things in a church level. Whether you're family working together or whether you're just another hired on staff, you have to keep in mind, you've got another man's ministry you represent, and you should entreat him as a father. That's what Paul says in Timothy. We need to entreat people as fathers. I hate what these people that have gone away, they flunked out, and they just tear down the leaders that we have. They're now in the grave. But these leaders that we all grew up listening to, not we all, me and Mom, Jack Hyles, Lester Roloff, John R. Rice, all these guys of the past, you can find bad about anybody. Mm-hmm. But they go to the extreme of saying they're adulterers. Well, first of all, you're 20 years old. He died 22 years ago.
How would you know?
How would you know? You're just taking the word of another bitter individual.
Right.
That's not fair. But they run all the way to that extreme side, and everything they say.
And they justify every negative thing they have to say by saying they are exposing sin. And, it's really funny because Jesus was on earth and did his ministry, and he knew every time he spoke to somebody and he looked them in the eye, he knew what their sin was. Yeah. And yet he did not go around exposing everybody's sin. I mean, he was so careful with the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
And he did not come to be an accuser of the brethren. Now, does that mean we cover up sin or illegal things?
Right,
no. But those things are dealt with by the proper authority. And that's what we taught our kids. Does this mean, you just have to shut up and take it, when you're mistreated in the family? No. We've, touched on that already. You go to your parent. You go to proper authorities, and all these, in reality, all of this family loyalty really is just learning to be a good Christian.
Right.
It really is in the family setting, and then that grows out as they get older into the church setting, into the wider community.
I think a lot of times because there's not proper family loyalty taught, built on the back of the Bible principles and premises, that we also destroy our families. I think of the time where in Brewster, the state came in and we had a boys' home, and the subject matter of discipline came up. Discipline for us, abuse for the state. We already knew that the state would always consider any real Bible discipline as abusive because they're anti-Bible. So we were pretty much ready for that. We had discussed a lot of it. But I remember, I think I'll speak on permission with you.
I was actually going to talk about that.
Well, go ahead.
It's been difficult to try and
jump in.
I'm an analytical person, so I'm trying to find a way to, because when you think of family loyalty, there's so many different aspects, so many different directions that you can view family loyalty, whether it be from the aspect of, you think of kind of the way that you mentioned it, where you felt that duty, to family, what am I going to do to their name? And that kind of family loyalty, or the family loyalty that talks about where we're talking about how we talk to others and the things we say. And really it comes down to two words: one, faithful, which is duty, and the other, discernment, which is how we talk and the things we say. And I can remember from a young age both being taught very, very thoroughly to us. And I think in both cases, family loyalty can be described as faithfulness and discernment. Faithfulness in making sure that you're living a life that is honorable to your family, and then discernment and realizing that not everybody has to know everything about everything in your family. And that story specifically, I actually was going to mention that. You know, we had a boys' home, and there's a guy that got messed up and was talking to a pedophile from his hometown, stole a car, drove across 3 state lines when the police finally got. Basically, I'm trying to set the stage here because there's so many people that just don't know the facts.
And still being crucified.
They're still
for
being
that
crucified
thing.
for that garbage. So this kid belonged in jail. But when he got caught, it was like, brought up things and said, I'm being abused, which none of it was true. But what's the state do? Plus, in our little town, the seat of our county, right?
Yeah.
They had the courthouse. And so, whoo, boy, big stuff going on there in the town of 22 people. They took everything so seriously. And not to say that, you shouldn't take your job seriously, but it was a little bit like, come on, guys, you're inventing something. But I can remember as a kid, I can remember how old I was, but I remember them doing interviews with us kids. And anybody in their right mind knows that the state, if they're trying to get a certain thing, they're going to paint the questions in a light that if a young person who maybe their mind mentally is not in a state to where they can actually discern what's going on, what's happening to them.
Probably 9.
They're already stressed. You were already stressed.
I can remember you told us. You said, guys, you're going to answer. I want you to answer these questions. Answer them honestly. Answer them truthfully. He said, but don't be surprised if they're trying to find a certain answer. Yeah. If they're trying to say something. And I can remember thinking about that when I went into the interview. It was just like, thinking about it, like, I don't want to make a mistake, I don't want to say something wrong. And I overthought it, obviously. But I can remember them asking these questions, and I would sit there, and you guys know me, It's like you ask me a question, and it's like overheating, My interview was longest. It took me 4 hours to answer the question. There only three questions. Yeah, only 3 questions. But I can remember, me answering the questions and having the ability to tell. We were trained to read our leadership, to watch them. And I can remember them asking a question when they got an answer, and I knew it was an answer that they could twist, and you can't explain that when you're 9. Like I can't find a way to say it. You feel, honestly, I felt like I was being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And it absolutely was.
You were, yeah.
But I can remember sitting there going, man, I messed up. I can't believe, I didn't say it the right way. I didn't, an aspect of family loyalty that you felt like
you didn't want to get your dad in trouble.
You betrayed.
Yeah.
And I can remember, and I think every young person will struggle with something like that. Mm-hmm. But I think more often than not, we've got young people who could care less about whether or not they're hurting their family with the words they say, with the things they say. And they're so worried about, after they've left the IFB, exposing all the wrong that was done to them, that they become this unfaithful and foolish person, that they're going to be willing to hurt the people around them on purpose, that they're gonna lash out and gonna talk about stuff that's nobody's business. Now, obviously, Mom, you gave an example. You said there's obviously things that come to the law and morality and things that should be said if it needs said.
Absolutely.
And that's what I mean by that's what discernment means. That's what that means. So there's people who like to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, family loyalty means lying. Family loyalty means deceit. No, family loyalty means discernment, and it means faithfulness, and it means all that's built on the back of who do we serve, who are we trying to please. Right. And I can remember, speaking to what you said, I can remember so many times when we were kids that we had done something as a family, and not that Dad would say, hey, don't tell anybody, but he was teaching us discernment. Mm-hmm. I can remember there were young people who were just starting in the church. They weren't where our family was, but they had jumped in. They're in with both feet, and there was that aspect of, oh, well, Pastor did that, so let's do that. Yeah. And I can remember there were youth activities that, the church would have, and because the kids were too young, they felt left out. Not that there was any form of a family disloyalty that happened, but that concept of, oh, it's not fair, jealousy that came up because there was something that they couldn't do. And I remember thinking about that growing up, going, you know how many people I could cause to be jealous because I tell them about something that I may have been awesome, but it's not something that they should be doing right now. You know, if we can afford to go on a family vacation and someone's barely paying their bills, I'm probably not going to come home and be like, "Oh, man, family vacation was awesome. It's so great." You know,
Something
just to
social
get
media
them.
has destroyed.
Absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely. So this aspect of family loyalty, I just feel like it's so broad and so many different angles to hit it from. But like if you boil it down, it comes down to faithfulness and discernment, and both of those have to be taught. And I'm very thankful that we had, even though we've said this before, you didn't grow up in an IFB family, you created one that I can't say I've ever seen in all the years of traveling and people I've been around, having a father or a mom and a dad that cared so much about teaching us to be faithful to the Lord, which resulted in faithfulness to family, but then also discernment.
Well, I will say that I can't speak for Jill, but for me, my mom was married and divorced 5 times. It seemed like every divorce was the kid's fault, and that's the way my mom lived. She's very bitter. She's an unsaved woman, and her disappointments in life were because her kids did something wrong, and all of us kids grew up feeling, all 8 of us kids just grew up feeling like we screwed up my mom's life, and she resented that we were in her life. And I just decided that, your mistakes were not going to be held against you as the reason I'm not happy. Mm-hmm. And so, that time where the questions were asked, we already knew. That's why we told you, tell the truth. Mm-hmm. We wanted that pressure taken off of you. But we did want to teach you discernment. Be careful, because these people aren't saved, and they look at discipline completely different. Right. So you may not be able to avoid answering their questions wrong.
Right. Like one of the questions they asked was, "Does your dad ever hit you?" And then point at the picture and tell us where. And I remember when they asked me that, I was like, 11 or 12?
You were 11.
I was like, and I think I even said it, I think I was crying. And I was like, "You're just trying to get my dad in trouble. My dad doesn't hit me. He punishes me." Or I think I might have said, he spanks me, but that's not hitting. Yeah. And I just remember the look in their eyes. My interview was very short because mostly I think because I cried a lot and they couldn't get me to stop crying. So they're like, "Please take this emotional child out."
But when you came out, you didn't have that feeling. No matter what, you didn't leave with that feeling. When it was clear when Will came out of that thing.
He was traumatized.
Yeah. He had his head down. He was nervous. Mm-hmm. And so when we were told, and we asked him, and then we were told what was said, actually they told Mom, they didn't tell me. And the verdict was, we're going to separate the kids from the dad, that he's a danger to that family. Again, what Will and the rest of the kids don't understand is we were already ready for that. We had already discussed.
Yeah, they were out for blood. They already made that decision.
They had already made that.
But the reason they couldn't get blood is because we already knew what we were going to do.
Right.
We knew. So the kids and Mom went to Michigan to be with my father and mother-in-law and that family, and school was there and everything was fine. But growing up feeling like I destroyed my brother and destroyed my sister's life and I destroyed my mom's life is a weight to this day that I carry. The last thing I was going to do in that circumstance many years ago was look at Bud and say, "You caused this." I didn't want him to feel that. That's why I said, just answer honestly.
Yeah.
Because whatever the repercussions are, I can handle it. As a family, we're not going to let them separate us. I mean, we might be separated for a little bit, but we're a family. Mm-hmm. And
in the end, the Lord is in control, and nothing's going to happen to us that doesn't come through his hand.
Right. So important that we build more churches that way, that so often, I mean, in the churches that I visited this week, there are so many other independent fundamental Baptist churches within 20 minutes and it's constantly church hopping going on. The preacher says something, I'm mad at him, or somebody else does something, I'm mad at him. And there's no commitment anymore in the church family. And it's one of the reasons we liked you from the start as far as your upbringing, your family, but you're in the same church your whole life, and we knew the benefits that come from that, and the value that comes from that. So when the transition is to move here, she's going to be okay because she understands that process. And our churches, our independent fundamental Baptist churches, don't need to swallow the woke lingo and accusations from the people that, I won't say that they didn't get hurt. They probably did get hurt. And I'm sure there were injustices that were done to them that should not have been done to them. And nobody that's walking with Christ would wish that upon them. But the reality, the balance side of it is we all got hurt. Every single one of us have been hurt. Not on purpose or on purpose, it doesn't matter. We've all been hurt. But what are you going to do? Quit? When we're dealing with the fact there's no perfect leaders, no perfect parents, no perfect pastor, no perfect brother, sister, friend, brother-in-law, uncle, father-in-law, mother-in-law. There's nobody perfect. So you acknowledge what's higher than that, and that's the commitment and responsibility that comes with being part of a family. And I'm not letting our mistakes or your mistakes as kids or my mistakes be that thing that destroys us. And this is where I've told you boys, if you're ever going to be my pastor, the transition has to be, I am now not the leader. Your guys are the leader. So we practice that beforehand in your ministries to a certain degree, where I back out and trust you. But the communication is always there, because our life isn't just right now. It's planning for the future. Here's the reality. Do you realize that one of you Benji could be my pastor someday? That's reality. We don't know how it's going to work out, but if I'm going to be hurtful and resentful and bitter, that will never happen. It will never happen. And so you have to remove those elements from your Christianity. And these people in these attack modes on fundamentalism have never grown up and processed properly hurt.
Yeah, and I think as a family, you too have to be aware, as a family unit, that one of the biggest attacks is on the family. And the devil uses our own failures, like when we mess up, to make us either feel so bad, like we don't deserve to be a part of this family, which is a messed up thought, or puts other people, extended family, in your path that says, oh, what you did is okay, and justifies what you've done, sort of winning you over and providing this place for you to go and to continue in your sin and to continue in what's wrong. I think as a family, that's one of the things you always taught us. Listen, if you're listening to the wrong people, if you're surrounding yourself with the wrong friends, and you don't make your family your friends on purpose,
You're good family members.
Then when you do struggle, you have nobody. It's like what you said, David, a support system. You don't have that support system there because you've built the secret family in the back that you think is more important, because they accept anything you do as being okay. And I think that's important to note that when you are raising a family, one of the biggest things is you got to get this family loyalty stuff down, because it's going to save your life. I look at all the things that I went through just through college and some of the decisions that I made myself. And if I didn't have those strong strings, I didn't have anywhere else to go, because I never thought that I needed to create that world. And I thank God I didn't, because when I made some poor choices, I was faced with, I have to deal with this. I have to work through my problems with the Lord and with my leadership, because it's important. It's like what you said, Courtney. It's important to you. You don't want to lose that.
Realizing you'll lose so much.
I know I gotta kind of wrap it up, but I'm going to pose this question maybe for everybody, and if you have something that comes to your mind, maybe you can answer it. But I know we've kind of dealt with the family loyalty from the, I don't know if you would call it philosophical standpoint, as far as learning to build that through communication, the faithfulness and the discernment. But a little bit maybe more physically or practically, how do you build, or what things can you isolate as we look over our past growing up in our family? What things were done to build that family loyalty among each other, amongst our family, not counting, dad sitting us down or talking to us or communicating to us? What are some things maybe that you look at and say, these are things that were the building blocks that ultimately built a tight-knit family? Because there are a lot of families that have the same structure. I mean, 2 boys or 2 girls or 4 kids or 5 kids or whatever. And they grow up, but they don't have that personal communication with each other. They don't have that, those close ties where they really don't feel any responsibility of, if I do this, I'm going to hurt the name of my family, or if I do this, I'm going to be separating from my family. That's almost like non-existent, and things weren't built in that family loyalty department. So I don't know if anything.
I think that the structure of our family, Mom and I drew our structure from scriptural example. So the greatest father that ever was our Heavenly Father. And he had a son. And there was a way that Jesus submitted himself to his Father. And it's kind of unique, but God put it that way and gave labels so that we could draw lessons from that. So there was often times where I looked at you kids and said, look, I made you, I'll take you out, make another one look just like you. Somewhat a joke, but you were like, oh, I'm not going to cross him on, when I was serious. I would tell you, I have sovereign privilege. God has sovereign privilege. God is sovereign. Mm-hmm. And so I would teach them sovereign privilege means I can do whatever I want for any reason, for whoever I want. And you have nothing to say. You can't sit there and get bitter. I may take Bud out or Will out and go to McDonald's and come back, and all the kids are seeing the McDonald's wrappers, and he's got his little cup with a milkshake in it, and he's walking in, and all the kids are like, oh man, they weren't allowed to do that. Because Dad had something. But what it produced in them was, if I please my dad, there'll be my times where he does things special with me that he's not going to do with them, and it caused them to not get mad at their authority, but to wait patiently for that same. So I think a lot of practical, just ordering our family, and they say the wife is the Holy Spirit of the home, and I do think that at times you can do equations like that where my wife held my authority, and when I wasn't there, she was there. As the Holy Ghost, and that she would report back to me, and that's the Holy Spirit. I can think of
so many things, parenting wise, that we did try. I think it's an interesting question because I am curious what each of you guys think about that. But the thing I want to throw in before you do that is, as much as we tried, looking back, I feel like God took up for our ignorance. There were some things, just following the will of God, that he gave to our family, and it was unbeknownst to us at the time. So being out in Brewster, being out in this small town where we knew we were following the Lord's will, and yet I feel like that had a big impact on our family being such a close-knit family. The singing, the kids singing with each other, constantly having to work together to harmonize their voices, their words, figuring out, all of that.
Stay in your lane.
Staying in your lane, but working together.
Pecking orders.
It's like
authority. I mean, all of those things were
in the music.
Yeah, in music. When I wasn't there and you weren't there, the oldest one was in charge, but the oldest one also got in trouble for what the little ones did. So teaching that pecking order, that's why she's bitter at all you. But teaching that pecking order was a process that taught them properly. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was done. So I was
Okay.
curious what they have to say.
Go ahead.
Jinx.
Go ahead.
Ladies first.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. That is an interesting question. When you boil everything down to practice, what can you do in a family to foster that? I think, Mom, you sort of mentioned this here a second ago, but talking about how, service and church and how that was the center, of our life. And obviously, your dad's a pastor, so for us, it was like, it's just where we are. Like we're all on staff. I'm not punching a card. I'm the free labor. Well, I say free labor. Really, it was Dad redoing everything we did, right? So
And paying for lunch.
right, and paying for lunch, exactly. But I think the working together, because here's the thing. It's a lot of it is just communicating. It's just communication. Well, do you just sit down and go, all right, let's talk. It usually doesn't happen that way. Not that it can't, but it usually doesn't. So what do? You work. And when you work, you got to talk to each other. I mean, you're not gonna. And here's the other thing. What's interesting about it is the more you work together, the more you realize you don't have to talk as much because you think the same. You're on the same page. Yeah. And that's the thing about it. We got on the same page. It wasn't just the work; it was the fun. We would have fun together, and our family. Those were the ones we had the most fun with. About people. I'm going to go out with my friend this weekend, or kids. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. It was like, I'm going to hang out with my family. What are you talking about? Like, what? Yeah, go down to the river, jump off the bridge. Yes, we jumped off the bridge. It wasn't that big of a bridge, but
You're pushed off by your dad.
They asked you that question. If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? Absolutely.
Yes.
Not friends, but family.
Brother. Yeah, family. My family, I'd do it. Definitely. Right behind you. But fun. So work and fun. And I talked about music, in service to the Lord and in praising the Lord. And that unity that we got from all being on the same team.
Giving. Sacrificing together.
Giving the sacrifices that you either endured together as a family or individually
and
in
the
different
excitement
areas.
we shared. Remember, I brought home the $100 bills and I threw it up. We were
Yeah.
I've never seen so much money, and I'm like, okay.
Those the little things. You can bring me $100
I was
bills
going to say,
anytime.
it was a big thing.
But in putting everything together, there's one other aspect that I think is missing from a lot of homes, because I think a lot of people know how to have fun. They might work together here and there, serve the Lord or go to church together. There's one area that is not a joint thing that everybody's really involved in. It's the leadership of the home, and having a single person who's willing to take the responsibility for leading the home and taking the flack if they make the wrong decision and not getting the credit when they make the right ones.
Your mom's done a good job.
But I think if you were to sum it up in a word, I would say discipline.
Yeah.
Because how can everyone be on the same page if there's not someone organizing the way
There's
we
no
think,
shepherd.
the way we act,
Right.
the way we I if you remove discipline, it doesn't matter if you have service and fun and work, and discipline is the structure that keeps that all moving. The conversations that we've had, they weren't born out of a, hey, let's talk about what we agree about. It was born out of a, you dummy, here's why you did that, and we're going to talk about it, or you're going to sit there and listen, and I'm going to talk to you about it, and really shaping the way that we thought as kids. And the only other thing I wanted to say was that faithfulness and discernment, they're really joined by this one thing called prudence.
Yeah.
The prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. That is that discernment to make the right decision in faithfulness. And I'm thankful that we've been guided in prudence, in being pushed towards the Bible and made to think about why we did what we did, even though sometimes my brain overheated when I was trying to figure out why. But, I think that if you practically want to put it on a level, all those elements, but if you don't have discipline, if you don't have that authority in the home, it's not going to matter.
Consistency.
So, mm-hmm.
Well, you said it all.
That's
so.
what I was gonna say.
I was actually going to say, playing hard together, but working hard together.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you covered all those things. I would say specifically because we were in the ministry, our dad was a pastor. I never felt like Dad had to go. Very rarely did he ever say, y'all have to stay here. I got to go be a pastor. So I never felt like we were on the back burner. It was, I got to go be a pastor. You're coming with me. We did it together. Not that we pastored, but we were, if something broke at the church, we were all here helping. Yeah. If a pipe burst, we were all here sucking the water out of the carpet together.
With a vacuum. Just want to clarify that. Here, a straw for you, and you get a straw, and you get a straw.
Let's go, guys. It's a great family activity.
Life with the Reeves really sucks.
No.
That's funny.
So, working together, but I think you were also really great at making sure we had times where you played. And we played just as hard as we worked. But together as a family, not just, kids go out to the backyard and play. I mean, there were times, but Dad was real big at being involved in what we were doing as well. And that, I think, just helps you learn how to think and process a little bit.
Yeah.
I had something else, but it fell out in my head, so it's not a bit important.
Yeah, I'm not going to let my wife escape this one because I think we were talking a little bit about this, and I think there are a lot of people that are listening that are coming from a different perspective. They're not maybe full-time in the ministry. Mm-hmm. They're coming from a home that is layman, and that they're deacons or they're just faithful church members. How do you foster that same type of closeness, family loyalty when your family isn't going to be at the church? It's just not going to be at the church as much as we were growing up. So how do you? It can still be done, but what are some things that you can look back and see?
My parents were both, not just my dad, not just my mom, but both together, were very involved in spiritual things. So my dad growing up, he would take weeks off of work to be chaperones for camps, for youth conferences. He would drive the bus for souling. So he was always looking for ways to be involved with us, not just taking family vacations or just strictly the fun stuff, which we did, but finding ways to be involved with us spiritually, I think, was a big thing. And then even just having family dinner every night around the table. Yep, couldn't get away from that. And family devotions, too. Mm-hmm. And my dad was a lay person, so, family devotions wasn't something hyper spiritual, anything like that. We actually had like a felt board with little felt pictures when we were kids.
Flannel graph?
Yes. Yeah.
My wife
so he would tell stories and post them up when we were kids.
Regular Baptist Press.
Oh, yeah.
But even lost art, just things like that, simple things people.
What about the other aspect? I think you were talking a little bit about not just your parents bending over backwards to be a part of your life, but flipping that around. What?
We would go to my parents' work events if they had to. My mom worked for a hospital, so a lot of times she had, I don't know what you would call it, like fairs and stuff she would have to work at weekends. So whenever we could, we would join her, go to my dad's work events when we could. So
you played. You had mentioned to me that he had obviously it's a bigger church, so they had this great thing, a men's softball league or whatever.
They had a church
and your mom would drag all of the kids to go root on Dad.
Awesome.
Embarrass himself in front. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that was an important aspect, that it's not just, and how it worked with our family was Dad would bring us to church, and it wasn't just Dad's doing construction. And it makes the family one. Instead of work is Dad's work, home is Mom's work, church is church work. Everything's together. Everything's family togetherness or oneness. And so I just think that's an important quality that everybody who's listening should apply with their family. If they have young kids or a family that they're starting out, having that desire of being a part of your kid's life, but also making sure they're a part of yours. And from the ministry perspective, I have heard it said from preachers that a lot of times they look down on bringing ministry home. They don't, when they're home, they're home, and ministry's ministry. But it was a little bit different growing up. You always brought ministry home. I mean, you talked about and it wasn't to talk about people just to talk about people or gossip. It was making your life our life. And what that did is am I going to grow up and serve at church on staff at my dad's church? No, I'm going to grow up and serve on staff at my church because it's one. And I think that's securing that ball of unity, where it just is so much easier, so much better and stronger to work together because it's yours.
Yeah. Hearing everything that was said, did anybody else want to say anything?
I think JT had something he wanted to throw in at some point.
Yeah, I did want to throw in, you know everything that you guys have all been talking about is all great stuff, but it's not just for you guys. We also, I've heard my wife talk about at the daycare, the kids will come in with wild, off the wall stories of things that their parents have done, and the daycare workers will actually look at them and be like, "Hey, you don't need to be telling us those things that are happening at home. Just live your life here." And I know even in Sunday school that I've had to do that a time or two with a kid who's talking about crazy things that are going on at home. So I just wanted to encourage that aspect of it, kind of in reverse, to admonish the kids who don't have that discernment, who don't know, hey, that's crossing the line.
Teach them family loyalty.
Exactly.
We do that all the time on our youth bus. Mia, what happens at home stays at home, okay?
Yeah, I think it's so
Happened like 2
important.
weeks ago.
So important to do that, but you also have to also keep the side of it to be sensible that when you hear something that's illegal,
Absolutely.
that the child
for
is
sure.
being,
Or dangerous.
you have, now you don't, I wouldn't coach a kid. I would go to the authorities myself, or I would first make a visit to that home and let the parents know, hey, this is what, this kid said, and I'm holding you accountable. That needs to change.
We've had young people say they were hurting themselves and gone to their parents.
Yeah,
I mean,
and we don't hide anything
No.
from the parents.
No.
If a child comes to me and says, I want to talk to you about something, but please don't tell my parents, I tell them, don't talk to me about it because I'm going to tell your parents because that has to be. So there's a balance there. You're exactly right, JT. There's a balance, and that's hard in ministry. Well, really what I wanted to say in closing this segment is the independent fundamental Baptist movement is getting really a lot of hard knocks that really should be given to the mom and dads, the homes, not the churches. And the churches are failing because the homes are failing. And so as you hear the complaints, the stories, I know they're out there. And I know there's pastors out there that could be crucified because they didn't handle it the way that this disgruntled person thinks it should have been handled. But remember, the pastor is more than likely someone who knows something about the situation that you don't know. And that's why it's important for you to stay in your lane. And it is possible to grow up in the independent fundamental Baptist movement, not get bitter, even though you get hurt, and not have a desire and a quest to find. Everybody that's ever left, they say they found something better, but the fruit doesn't show that. There's divorce, there's the wrong kind of music. They have left the things that would protect them and give them guidance and success and happiness. And so I know we talked a lot about from the standpoint from our home and the missions and the growing up in your home. Every home is different, but do not put off on the independent fundamental Baptist movement the failures of yours to be the right kind of child and follower, or that should be put on you as parents. Don't put that off on the movement and crucify a whole movement that didn't do anything but stand up and say, here's the legalistic rules, but they're here to give you the best family and the most secure life. And these people that want to criticize the dating rules, do you know how special it is to get to the altar pure? How rare that is? That's a gift, girls, that you can give your husband that nobody else should ever have had. And you're few and far between that gets to do that because you had parents that said, maybe not perfect, but they wanted you to have that gift on your wedding night. Have the right attitude about life and stop trying to blame everybody else for the fact that you quit and got sideways because you don't know how to forgive, and be balanced. So we're going to go to a song, and then we'll come back and you can ask us some real mean questions.
Now's the chance. Ask some questions. The third degree is the segment we'll go to next. As soon as we come back from a song, the song we're going to hear next is He Keeps Forgiving, the Faithman Quartet. We'll be right back. Welcome to the Third Degree, segment where we answer your questions, no matter how difficult they may be. Have at it. Give us the third degree. We're watching the live chat on YouTube, and you can also text us your questions, 920-940-8275. We had one that was sent to us last week. It was sent to us via email, so we did miss it last week, but we will ask it today. Get a chance for a different set of, Pastor and Mrs. Reeves, I guess, would be able to chime in on this one.
Get those questions in, though.
Yeah, get the questions in. We're watching the chat. Here we go. A question in regards to the church kid challenges. And this one was brought by Emily. She asks, with how various authorities have treated and reacted to you over the years, did you ever feel like you could not talk to them about your problems? If so, how did you biblically get past feeling stuck without help? In my own experience, God's promise of biblical authority has always pulled through and pushed me to the Bible, but I am wondering if you can explain a clear way to process a problem of communicating with authority about difficult issues.
That's a good question. I think it was to the kids.
Yeah.
I can give I don't know if I said this last week, but something that Mom helped me with when I struggled with at times with Dad's response to me or whatever, if we had conflict. And I felt like it was just not fair. And so because he wasn't being fair, he wasn't helping me. That's how I felt. And I remember expressing something like that to Mom, and I don't even remember what it was specifically about. And she said, well, do you remember where your dad came from? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what his past is? And I said, yeah. And she goes, okay, well, don't you think that maybe he just needs some time to think about what you're asking? And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And she goes, do you think that your dad is perfect? I'm like, no, obviously I don't think he's perfect. And she said, great. Are you perfect? And I'm like, no, I'm not perfect either. She goes, good. Then maybe you should both give yourselves a timeout and then come back to this. And I think that really helped me to understand that when you're talking to leadership, they can get in the flesh just like you can get in the flesh and maybe not handle everything in that conversation at the time correctly. And you can both walk away being frustrated. But from a follower's perspective, to go, well, they're my leaders, so they should be perfect is just, it's so immature, and it's just not a reasonable way to think. And so I just remember Mom really helped me to kind of go, okay, I have to give him a break, just like I would want him when I'm in the wrong to cut me some slack. And time and again, I would say those issues work themselves out, whether we rediscussed it or I brought it back up or he brought the issue back up with me later, which a lot of times that's how it was. But just not getting frustrated to a point where, I'm just never talking to my dad again because he hurt my feelings.
Right.
Okay, that makes no sense.
I think there's an aspect to the question that was asked that I think comes from, if you've ever, every Christian does this, you dig yourself into a hole and then you realize, that sermon's preached and, pastor may not even have you in mind, but the Holy Spirit's got the gospel gun pointed at you and he's unloading both barrels. And you sit there feeling like you're this small. But here's where I think a lot of people, the reason I'm saying this is because I've had this so many times myself where you do something wrong and you hide it. You tell a lie and you tell another lie to hide it. And what's the Bible say? Be sure your sin will find you out. And you know that verse. You've heard it your whole life, but you're like, maybe I'm the exception. Maybe no one will find out.
Yeah.
And there's that aspect that makes you just keep pushing it off. But the spiritual side of you, if you're someone who, of course, as children of God, we have the Holy Spirit. He's not going to stop prodding us and saying, hey, every time a sermon's it could be a sermon about who knows what, totally unrelated to anything that you've done, but the Holy Spirit still brings it around and smacks you in the face with it, And I can remember so often that, times when I was growing up where I'd, been an idiot, was cheating in school or something like that and thought I wasn't going to get caught. And I remember sitting there, hearing the messages and being like, you could just go talk to your leadership. Just go tell them. And I remember my parents used to say this all the time. You'll be in less trouble if you just come tell me than if we find out. I never believed that, but maybe that's the problem. I knew either way, I didn't want to be in trouble. No one likes getting punished. But here's what I'm boiling it down to is you have to realize that if you're not willing to take the steps necessary to get right with God, get right with those around you, with leadership, to be accountable to somebody, that it is a pride problem. That's what it is. You will not open yourself up to having a doctor look at you and diagnose you and say, you got a bad case of cancer and you got to do this about it. You got to stop doing this. You got to cut this out of your life completely. You got to submit yourself to what the doctor has to say. All those things, the freedoms that you feel like you're going to lose, the loss you feel like you're going to experience because you are harboring that wrong inside due to pride. Mm-hmm. Now, we would all like to think that because, we have leadership, that our leadership is all-knowing. They're not. And be sure your sin will find you out means that eventually someone's going to find out. And that's what good leadership is there for. It's that before you off the edge, you've got a leader that's going to be like, whoa. Now, what we are as Christians, we're real good at hiding. We are so good at hiding what's wrong in our lives. Mm-hmm. And you see that in testimonies of people all over the place, pastors who've been, who struggled and fell out of the ministry, young kids who grew up in IFB that jumped off into nothing, and you can bring it all back to this thing of pride. Well, how do you get past that? Because you have to think about that. If you're a sick person and you're embarrassed about it, how are you going to overcome that embarrassment to go to your leadership and say, help me, I need help, I've done wrong? How do you bring yourself to that? It has to be a desire. You have to have the desire to please God more than you do anyone else. It has to be your relationship with the Lord. You value it to such a high extent that it doesn't matter if you're embarrassed. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if the punishment feels like it's going to outweigh, you're going to be so embarrassed by everything. I remember when I was growing up, one of the classic things my dad would like to do when us boys screwed around or messed up or, got in trouble real good is he'd just shave our hair off. Now, not like shave with a razor, but, cut it short.
Flat top.
And that was, if that's what you call it. It was good. It was free. Now I'll take it free.
It sure did work.
But that's what I'm saying is why was that so effective? Because what's the first thing that punishment did? Is it
vanity?
It took away your pride. Mm-hmm. Not that
because you can't put the hair back on your head,
right? And we're guys vain. They want to look good. I want to look nice. You didn't care. Yeah, you're like, I don't care. That's why you never cut your hair.
Still doesn't
That's why
care.
you never shave your hair. That's right. He'll crawl out of bed and be like, I'm good.
Dad had to think outside of the box for me. Cut my hair and I was like, yeah, who cares?
Put a hat on.
It was food for me. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, but I really think that what it comes down to is there's a pride problem that keeps you from getting right with God, and that you have to get past that. And you have to have a desire to please God more than you want to preserve your pride.
Yeah, and I think from last week's show, Church Kid Challenges, that perspective is right. But I will warn you, taking that into adulthood is real. People do it all the time. I have people sitting in my church that the Holy Spirit, I know, is hitting them right between the eyes. But I don't know because they talk to me about it. And I know that they would benefit if they did, because I can give them steps to fixing things. But that's a pride issue. I'm not going to. I shouldn't have this problem. I'm old. I should know better. All those things. But here's the thing, and it really ties in with what you said. We've lost the idea of being people that value longevity. A longevity in Christ, a longevity in relationships. That's why divorce runs rapid. That's why marriages are. We don't even consider marriage. We just have relationships. To do what it takes to have that longevity, you have to value the outcome. So here I am. I'm the pastor. I don't expect everybody to agree with me or understand me. That's reasonable. I think that's actually. I would think there was something wrong with my ministry if everybody just agreed with me.
Oh, I disagree.
But what I do think is not healthy is when you don't agree with your pastor, not doing a Bible study on your own to try to get to agree. Instead, you do a Bible study to try to prove that you're right and he's wrong.
That's a good point.
And then only then you come to him when you think you got things ready and you're going to go, I got you, and only to be sorely disappointed. We have to look at, it's our responsibility not to give up on godly leadership in our life. And so you may feel like it's pointless to come to me and that I won't understand your position, but you have to believe that God knows what he's doing and that your point and your position is being considered, but the truth may be contrary to your point and your position. And when you're confronted with the truth, you have to be willing to step back and let go of your point and your position and see God's point and God's position. So.
And the only thing I would actually not even really add is just agreeing with you that it all comes down to, in the end, your trust in God. You going to leadership does not mean you think leadership has all the answers or that leadership is going to give you all the right answers. It's because you trust God, and God encourages you to get counsel and to go to leadership, even when you're a young person, a teenager, and it's your parent, and even if your parent's not in church, yes, then it's commanded. And it's part of exercising our faith in God to go to leadership. And it's amazing because if you look at all the stories in the Bible, how often God gave leadership, even ungodly leadership, the right answers. The heart of the king is in his hand; he turns it whithersoever he will. And it's just a part of trusting God that you go to leadership. Doesn't, depending on, obviously, there's a lot of depending on. If you're an adult, it's not like you just go and obey what someone tells you to do, but getting counsel. And if you're a young person, then obedience, depending on who that authority is and what their place is in your life.
So I think that her question stems a little bit from when she was younger. She had a pastor where she struggled with the fact that she could see things that were wrong, were in issues, and they weren't dealt with.
Well, I would just say,
so
I would say when you're a kid and you see those things, you better have a healthy relationship with your parents, because that's not your business. You as a child are not in a position of correcting your leadership. I've told my kids, I want to hear you ask me questions when you don't understand something, because that's how you tell me you think that I'm wrong and you see it differently, or the Bible sees it differently. But you come at me with, you're wrong, Dad. I'm not even going to listen to you. But if you come at me with a Dad, can I ask you a question? I don't really understand. The Bible says this, and it seems like that's contradictory. Can you help me understand that? Then I can acknowledge maybe I said it wrong or I taught it wrong. I can own that, but you don't have the right to demand it. And I think we have a whole generation of young people that did not have spiritual parents, had to forge out their walk with God through sitting in a Sunday school class and hearing a preacher from the pulpit. And then they had spent so much time growing up picking apart their parents that now that transferred to picking apart their pastor. And that's a major flaw. And if that's not fixed, it'll pick apart the husband, and they'll pick apart everything. So, I think that's just, the kids need to be taught, don't put your hand on the man of God. Don't do that. If he's wrong, God has the power. He knows where he's at, and he's got adults that are members of that church that have the responsibility to actually hold that pastor accountable. And if they don't, then you live through it trusting God and learn your lesson, file it in that, and then don't do what they did.
I'll jump in here real quick. I think this is something that I learned a lot in high school. Not an expert.
Bring your pastor a coffee.
Oh, man.
Sound bites.
No, it has nothing to do with actually my dad, but there was a time in high school where I was the last one. I'm the youngest. So I was the last one to graduate. So Jewel had graduated out. She was gone. So it was just me and just a handful of other kids in the school. And I think Peter taught my last year or last 2 years. Last year. So, but there was a couple years before that where we had a couple other teachers in there. And
they didn't know what they were doing.
yeah, I was trying to figure out how to adequately say they weren't trained very well, or they were not
They were
whatever.
not seasoned.
They were
They may have been
Christians.
trained, they just didn't follow the training.
But there was a really big learning curve that I had to figure out in high school, because I would sit there, because I know exactly how to do ACE, and I've done 11, 12 years of it. I know the ins and outs, and I know how to be a good teacher because I'm in 11th grade, And but there were a lot of things that were done, in my viewpoint, done incorrectly. Nothing immoral or anything like that. Just things that I was just like, wow, this is ridiculous. And I remember in 9th and 10th grade going to my parents, because we'd always talk in the evening after for dinner or whatever, and I'd express something that's frustrating that happened at school. And being in a family that is the pastor's family, my dad would often decipher what was being said and categorize it, whether it was important enough to deal with. But I remember him going into the classroom and addressing the issues that I had brought to him. And I know the teachers in there knew, well, how does he even know this happened? And I had to live with that.
It wasn't Joel.
Yeah.
She wasn't there.
And I had to live with that, knowing that they knew that. And so I had to learn, in large part, and I say this phrase all the time, stay in your lane. Mm-hmm. I had to learn that a lot of those things that I saw that were miscues or things that were done wrong were really little and didn't matter. And I really learned to put my head down, literally, in my little cubicle and just worry about my own work.
Man.
And I just didn't care. I was like, unless a kid's getting thrown across the room, I don't care. And I think I learned that my last 2 years really is where I just was like, whatever, put my head down. And now I'm there. This has to come from a viewpoint of balance, But I know it helped me a lot, because now looking back at all those things, they honestly, probably 50% or more, weren't even really issues. Maybe things, if I was the teacher in that classroom, I would appreciate that pastor's kid maybe giving me a little bit of grace as I'm trying to navigate the system.
But you have to be careful that, everybody has to hear the whole thing. So there's your side, and then there's going to be my side. Yes, I had to sit there and decipher, is that worthy to come in? But there were times I didn't think it was worthy to come in, and I would just tell you, they're your leaders. Mm-hmm. ACE is great for exposing the weak character traits of students, but it's even better at exposing the weak character traits of the adults. And trust me, they may not be doing paces, but they're getting an education, and they're improving too. So you be patient with them. And then I would always remind the kids, just because I didn't rally to your side and solve your problem doesn't mean you have the right to shut down and not bring them to me. A lot of times that's what happens. If you don't feel you got representation on your grievance, then you go, what's the point? I'm not going to tell them anymore. And that's dangerous and cripples your leadership. You have to believe in them. Now, you learned a lesson, put my head down and go forward, because that's what you needed to learn. But you also had the safety of your dad wasn't blind. At least you had the knowledge to know, I'm not blind. I step in there all the time. I do correct things and see things.
It does come back to exactly what Mom, you said, and that is to trust in God. If it's a big enough issue, I think my leadership will see it, get addressed, that will be taken care of. But I just think too often as followers, we think things are bigger deals than what they are, because we're viewing it from our standpoint, and we really do view it from that teenager, adolescent viewpoint of, I know what's better. I know when you really don't. You don't know.
Have the whole picture.
You don't have the whole picture. And so 9 times out of 10, if you just trust the Lord and watch, God takes care of it.
We've got 2 other questions that are hard hitting.
Right.
Question for Pastor and Mrs. Reeves. How would you approach having grandchildren that may stray away from what they were taught by their parents / your kids? Taught by your parents or your kids?
Well, in all honesty, we have the luxury of having all 4 of our kids here. So unless God changes something, we get to be part of helping our kids and sons and daughter-in-laws. We're a tool to assist them in raising their kids. So I would say first thing is build a relationship with the parents. That is important, that we never isolate ourselves and the parents where the kids would believe they could find any solace in us, that we always push them to their parents. But at the same time, I'm negotiating this process as we speak, because of the time that we live in, of using the pulpit to train and to teach. And knowing my grandkids are sitting in the auditorium trying to not tiptoe through the tulips so much. I guess it's tiptoeing through the tulips, but swinging a big stick at the same time. So it's difficult. But if you're talking about, if my kid fails with training their child and their child goes away from the Lord, I would not condone anything. I would support my kids, my grandkids' parents. If they're doing right, they're not perfect, but if they're still going to church and they're still soul winning, that grandchild's not going to find any comfort in grandma and grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
I agree 100%.
They're going to know we love them, but they're also going to, what have I told you guys? This family's not stopping because one of you stopped.
No, I do take, as a grandparent, my role seriously to
Spoil them.
to spoil my grandkids. No, to build a relationship with my grandkids so that I can be on page with their parents, and I can be, like he said, a tool, an assist that, we're all on the same team, wanting the kids to turn out right.
Yeah.
Now if their parents go away from the Lord, then, and I lose my influence on their parents, then obviously I will still try to maintain some kind of relationship with my grandkids so that I can influence them. I don't want to foresee or even think about that happening. So
we try to maintain an insistent that our children's kids look at their parents as the greatest parents in the world. We're not the greatest parents in the world. We are to you, but we trained you to be 10 times better than us. And we want your kids to look at you that way. So we got to watch what we say and what we do, that we don't become a wedge and purposely pry you away from your kids, or the kids away from you. But like I said, if you stay on Bible premise and you stay on in the Christian realm, standing on the right side of God, a kid that goes the wrong way, whether it's a son or daughter or whether it's a grandchild or not, they're not going to be eager to come back to you and think that they're going to con you into taking their side over mom and dad's side.
No,
So
not allowing, there's no wedges going to work.
I'm just going to be where I was at 20 years ago. In 20 years, I'm going to be. I'm not leaving the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement because of what my kids are doing, or my grandkids.
And once again, this always comes down to control versus influence. Our kids are all adults, so we have no control over them as far as how they're parenting. Obviously, if they're on your staff and they're in our family,
That's
but we have
limited, though.
influence.
Yeah, that's
You have
limited.
influence, especially as we live close together and interact a lot. That influence is stronger. So
He was recognizing too. Somebody like Pete comes into the family. It's not just his personality, but just he didn't grow up in the Reese family. He doesn't know how it all works. Here's Jewel. Her role is to be submissive to her husband. But how many times has she said, "You need to go talk to my dad"? And me knowing how she thinks, because I trained her, sitting back and having to wait for Pete to make a choice to come see me, at the same time believe that God has ability to teach Pete what Pete needs to know without having to come talk to me. So it's both sides. If God can teach me these things, and I didn't have a pastor, who am I to say that God can't teach Pete that without him having to come to me if he keeps his heart right towards the Lord? And so there's a lot of aspects to our life as parents and grandparents that is becoming new challenges for us. But to be proactive, you look down the road. It's longevity what we're looking for. So
I will throw in one thing. It just popped in my head really quick, and that is At Grandma and Grandpa's house, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
In other words, grandchild, as much as I love them, they're going to come into our house. They're going to be respectful. They're going to abide by the godly principles and standards that we have. If they're not willing to do that, then we'll go meet them at McDonald's. And we'll say hi to them. We'll give them hugs.
We ain't
Send
paying
them a
for
Christmas.
the meal. We ain't paying for the meal
We'll
though.
send them a Christmas present. But, there's no getting around the fact that when somebody goes away from the Lord, it does
Bring a separation.
bring a separation in your fellowship. And it's not that we moved. We're not separating from them. If they choose to separate from us, that's their choice.
Next question.
Brother McMurtry asked, question for the kids. Obviously, you guys put up with a lot of junk in the IFB. So what did your parents do to help keep you from getting bitter towards the whole thing?
We're not. We're not.
We're not bitter?
I thought we
Not
were
bitter? We're bitter.
I think you touched on that a lot last week in last week's broadcast, but
I think a couple of different things. One would be when he was personally hurt. I can't ever really remember a time when he addressed it to the family. It's more like we were like, what? And we were like, why are you putting up with that? So I feel like that was probably a healthy. I never felt like Dad was whining to us. Like, oh, nobody accepts me in fundamentalism, blah, blah, blah. Or this is done wrong to me or whatever. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like that was never a thing to the extent.
I knew what independent
Okay.
meant.
Right. And you always did say that. But I think to the extent where something did happen that was like really wrong happened to you in college, but you never told us about that until after many years later. And we'd gone to a conference somewhere, and the person who did you wrong was there preaching the conference, and he came up to you and he was just being very friendly, and I think it said something about, I don't even remember, but anyways, acted as if he was very proud of you. And I remember you feeling a little bit, I think you were touched by that because you thought, oh, this guy thinks I'm an idiot, or always thought I was an idiot. And so I do remember later, I don't know if we were in a hotel or where we were at, but you did share with us kids the nature of that event. And I remember thinking, how could you go to this conference that you knew he was going to be there? How could you do that? I mean, if somebody did that to me, I wouldn't want to be in the same room with them ever again. So I think just the way our parents modeled appropriate Christian behavior and forgiveness gave us no room to be bitter ourselves. So, and then fast forward another probably 10 years after that, and just the relationship that's between, I'm not even going to say the individual's name, because the relationship that I think us kids personally have with him is just amazing. You would never, and I feel like we've learned some from this man, and we've benefited because my father was able to just go, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to be the better Christian. That person made a mistake. They did wrong, but I'm not holding it against them for forever. So I don't know.
Let me just say
helps.
that you make it sound like I'm Jesus. And
No.
well, let me just say this. There is a balance there. When you're done wrong, you cannot escape hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And when those things happen, I was very hurt. I mean, there was some deep hurt there. But at the same time I was hurt, I had the knowledge and the understanding that people change. They learn things through the years. And I guess I took it as a challenge to prove that person wrong. And my longevity and faithfulness in the ministry did exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just willing to outlive the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say this. I'll just tell you, because this is just the truth. During a family conference, I was one of the preachers in the family conference, and the pastor told me the night that I preached I did a great job, and the next day he told me, I'm not going to let you preach anymore because we just don't like that kind of preaching. And I was so confused. But I told him, I said, well, you're the pastor. I said, you're in charge. I mean, if that's what you want, then I'll sit on the front row and amen. You'll not have a bad spirit out of me or my family at all. But may I tell you this, you're hurting my family, you're hurting my wife, and you're hurting the 4 kids that'll be sitting there, and none of them will understand that. And to be honest with you, it just shows me that you're a hireling and your people run you, because there wasn't a problem last night when you told me it was an awesome message. So that's just a true story that took place. And to this day, I love those people. I love the man that sat me down. But I was hurt, and I felt betrayed, and I felt like he was disloyal to me, and other people were disloyal to me. But in the end, here's the thing. Do I want to throw out the opportunity for people to admit they were wrong? By me? No, I'm serious.
That's good.
Do I want to waste that by just closing the door?
Right.
And just saying, I will never talk to you again?
Well, and I think you often brought up how you have made mistakes yourself, and you would hope that we would never hold those mistakes against you, or never think that you would never change. You could never change. So no. Do I think you were a saint? No. But I do think it's a big part of learning how to deal with problems is watching your parents deal with these problems live. And yeah, maybe I didn't communicate that well enough. I mean, I could clearly see when you and Mom were hurt. And yeah, that hurt me. I wanted to go beat them up. Let's go. Let's raise family unity. Like, talk about loyalty. I'm going to go beat them up.
I know we're going kind of long. I just wanted to say one last thing. Did you have something to say too?
I just wanted to pitch in real quick.
Go ahead.
I'll be real brief. I think a vital part of it was he taught us, Pastor taught us, Dad taught us that Independent Fundamental Baptist is not just a movement. It's the fundamentals of Scripture. So people will disappoint you no matter what. But those principles are what pulled you out of the world that you came from. So you constantly put the guardrails of Christianity, of thankfulness, the guardrails of gratitude in front of us, because you said, listen, IFB is just as messed up as any of us.
Yeah, I did.
But the fundamentals, independent fundamentalism, that's not people. That's not churches. That's principles.
That's true.
Good.
And we stay faithful to those, because those are what has produced the home that you're living in and that you'll be able to raise your kids in.
You're wise beyond your years.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Will.
I was just thinking that the aspect, I think, to the question too, when he says the junk, that just covers so much. Like, what junk? Which junk? Do you want to narrow it down so we could talk about that? But it's a whole topic in and of itself. But when you think about it as a kid growing up in IFB, what I was going to say is exactly what you said, where basically, it's the principles. It's not that we didn't consider ourselves part of the IFB, but honestly, if the IFB was ever screwy on something, we're like, well, that's not what we are, but I'm still independent. It never caused us to want to went by a church, and they had a gymnasium. Kay and I, we were going somewhere, and they had a gymnasium, and they had the words independent, and you could see the dirt marks from where they used to have fundamental, and they had taken it off, and it just said Independent Baptist.
They're transitioning.
I was just like, wow, there are those people.
Fundamental.
We can still see it.
But we could still see I could still see the dirt marks up on there. Yeah, they didn't paint over it, didn't wash it. It was just they took down fundamental, and the shadow of what they used to be is still there.
Man.
I think the biggest thing is I taught you guys to be thick-skinned.
Yeah.
You got to be thick-skinned. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt
Yes,
me.
because people in our own church talk about people in other churches.
Grow up.
Yeah,
So
and
good.
some of the junk being people that left and criticized the IFB, and how do you protect your kid? How did our parents protect us from getting bitter towards? I mean, you got to think about it. You grew up in a preacher's home. How many people do you see leave? A lot. You're going to see it. You're going to see people who are bitter, and then how many preachers' kids get bitter because they start to listen to the people who leave, and you just don't care anymore. And it's like, well, there's something wrong, because the world says insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And obviously, since people don't like the IFB, therefore IFB must be terrible. I don't want to be insane, so I'm going to jump ship. And it's just the craziness that permeates IFB at the moment.
If they get saved, they'd understand the joy of living for the Lord.
Yeah, it's good.
That's
And with that, right? Yeah, with that, we're not going to give any more time for for any more questions. You can save them up, send it to us in an email. We'll read it next week. We want to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of The Brook. We hope you'll join us again next week, the same time, same place, for another fun-filled show. David raised his hand like a student in a classroom. Yes.
I thought it'd be kind of fun to do this.
Oh, no.
And
You
in
don't get
light
your own
of the
segment.
family theme, to announce that me and Courtney are expecting.
Are you really?
No, April Fool's.
You're a jerk.
You should have been like, yeah.
I should have let it go a little longer.
I one less staff person.
Everybody thought I was.
That was a good one.
You're a good liar.
He's a terrible liar.
Question is,
You can only hold it for
Courtney know
10 seconds.
Just Courtney know?
I asked for permission if I could do that before I did it.
This is why he's the youth director.
Yeah, here's what he would
right.
do is he'll leave, we'll get off the broadcast, he'd be like, April Fool's again! We are! You join us again next week, the same
Mom and I
time.
are expecting.
And this, for another fun-filled, after that, you're not going to want to join us next week. Join us next week for another fun-filled show. David, Pastor, Peter, Mrs. Reeves, Jewel, Courtney, Hope, and JT. Thank you for another great episode. You can find this episode next week on all podcasting platforms and on YouTube. And last week's episode is available as an audio podcast. We did not get the video one exported. Brother McMurtry was complaining that we didn't leave it up long enough. We try to get it put out the very next week, but
Don't get
the
bitter.
ministry continues. Yeah, don't get bitter, brother. Just tune in when we're actually live,
Good things will come to those who wait.
or tune in when we're live, and you won't miss anything.
Broadcasters are.
Yeah,
Change your whole schedule around us.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see you next week. Wait, what's the song? JT, we got one? Yes, we do. Preach the Word, Parkside Baptist
Amen.
Church. We'll see y'all next week.